Okay, so we're live on YouTube right now, but obviously we're not mic'd, so but I can turn on the mic so that we'll. Okay, I'm gonna turn on the mic since we're live on YouTube. Good morning, folks. Trying to think. Okay, there we go. There's my. Hold on. Hopefully I did that right. Okay, so we have 13 seconds remaining live on air, but we are live on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, give me a hot second. And we will be on live air in 1 second. Never mind.
20. Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. WWSU 1069. On the phone at 937-775-5555.
Alrighty, good morning. You're listening to WWSU 106.9 FM, Fairborn, Dayton, Dayton's right choice. This is your host, James Naylor. Welcome back to Deconstructing the American Dream. This is the first time it is on a Monday, which it's supposed to be on a Monday. We're not normally Wednesdays like we have been in the past. I have 3 lovely guests in the studio with me today. Let me just put on my headphones, make sure I can actually hear y'all. Alrighty. So, as I said, welcome to the 3rd episode of Deconstructing the American Dream. My lovely guest, if you'd like to start introducing yourselves, you can go ahead and do so.
Hi. I'm Jeremiah Mauk. I'm a junior at Wright State, and I major in business management.
Awesome. Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming on.
And I'm Isa, Master's of the Humanities graduate program.
And I'm A. I'm also a graduate student. I'm doing humanities with a concentration in African American and women and gender studies.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining me so early this morning and for hanging with me as I get things figured out. So as I kind of spoke with you a little bit, this whole construct of this show is to talk about the American dream and the ideologies of American society and American culture. And before, the American dream was an economic, concept, before it was a political concept, it was a lot about, freedom and liberty and, gaining all of that. But we know historically a lot of groups in the U.S. Did not have freedom all the time and were historically marginalized. So the whole point of this episode, I want to look at kind of the history of our nation and how that has kind of impacted the views on the American dream and just the entire American dream as a concept. So I guess the first question I'll start off with this morning is just, do you think our history has had any bearing on the American dream as a concept? Anyone can start.
So I definitely think it has. And the way that I look at it is really, like you said, there's a lot of economic reasons that I think started with the American dream. And for a lot of people, it was a lot of working class people, trying to find better opportunities, trying to find their own economic opportunities, start their families, practice, get away from religious persecution. But it was at the expense of, like you said, marginalized groups. And so when you're talking about the Americas, especially, the United States, the settler colonialism of it all is, to me, what the American dream was equated to at that time. And as it's continued, it still is in line with this economic prosperity that capitalism tricks you into thinking is just like a pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of thing. I definitely think it's changed over time as our relationships with working class struggles changes, as our relationships with social services changes. I think now is a really polarizing time. Some people are like, the American dream is to leave. I've heard that a lot. I've also seen it in other ways where the American dream is to fight for something better and make something more equitable out of the situations that we're in now through like community building and social activism, basically. But I think for a lot of people, the history and especially with just the economics of it, they still relate the American dream to financial prosperity and acquisition to capital. And that's kind of, I guess, those are the two ways that I've really seen people discuss it as of recently.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on that?
In my head, started like Cold War with Russia when we were, making gender stereotypes and things like that of mom stays at home and then the dad goes out and gets the paycheck. So that's like in my head when the American dream started. You have two kids and you're making enough money to eat out once a week or something. I don't know.
No, yeah, I think that's a really good distinction about, I think you're kind of talking about the nuclear family model,
Yeah.
where it's like the husband, the wife, you have a boy and a girl, and that's the perfect family. The husband is, blue collar, white collar, whatever, really hard working, working class man. The wife stay at home, she cooks, she takes care of the kids. So yeah, and I think too, because I'm a humanities major, so you're going to hear me say intersectionality a lot and how things are all connected because they are. We're human beings, a part of nature, we're all connected. So the inherent connection between patriarchy and gender roles and acquisition to capital, I think, is really interesting when you're looking at the American dream as well. That's a great point to bring up.
So I want to piggyback off that. As you said, yeah, I agree that like the American dream. So the idea that through hard work and without any other social ties, so like inheriting wealth or family status, does not determine your success into that prosperity. We know that to be false. Um, but that's the idea of the American dream. That through hard work on your own, um, you know, talking to the right people, that you will acquire some type of prosperity. Um, as a millennial, and I'm sure for Gen Z, we have known that not to be true, that it is dependent um, on your family and like the previous generations. So, like, most of the time, for most Americans, there's not enough generational wealth being passed down because most of the wealth that people people back in like the 80s and early 90s was like buying a house. That was the one way to pass on wealth. Now no one can buy a house. So there's no way for the working class to distribute their wealth to their families. Um, and yeah, and just like we still hold on to the idea that through hard work um, that we'll be able to prosper.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was interesting, like all the things that you guys are bringing up, especially the post World War II view, because I was reading something about this last night actually, of how, especially after World War II and kind of like the 50s started and like the, the white flight and urbanization and whatnot, and we kind of started like this drive, for to be like a hyper capitalist nation, and buy a house, buy a car, get a good job, and just like kind of that, when I even think, that was the 50s, was even the 50s and the 60s was also kind of the 2 decades that we think of Americana. I don't know if you guys have seen that term or heard that term, but that aesthetic, that ideal of Americano, and that's also where we kind of start to see the popularization of the American dream, which is one of the reasons, one of the inspirations for this show. So that's really interesting. And like you were saying, Isa, it is, I feel like in this article that I was reading, let me pull up the article so I can actually like properly cite and not just be like, and this thing that this person said.
How college student of you to do that, honestly.
Um, I was with the New York Times. It was an article in 2017, actually. It was with the New York Times. They were talking about the housing market of like the housing market crash in 2018, and then it was so this was like I said, this is old, so this was 2017, and then they were talking about something Trump said and how apparently then President Trump said how like the American dream was back. So again, it's a little old. It's a 2017 article, but I still thought it was kind of interesting because we're seeing the progression of these topics today. So.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when people say like the American dream is back, and even the aesthetic that you're bringing up, like the Americana. To me, when I think of that aesthetic, I'm thinking of old money, and so that is what that aesthetic represents to me. And I think it's just interesting in terms of experience, because also in the 50s and 60s, you have a lot of like Black liberation movements. A lot of social justice movements happening, and so for me, that puts into the lens of who was the American dream for. So you have, white people who have acquisition and generational wealth that they continue to build for themselves. And then after World War II, obviously, like you said, there's a boom in a lot of sectors in the United States. But then on the other side of that, who is making these people their wealth? And it's the working class that they're exploiting. And I think a good point that Issa made is that the working class has no generational wealth to hand down. And when you look at history, a lot of history, despite all of the cultural shifts, it always comes back to class struggle. So I think that's just a really important thing to highlight.
And I think it's also interesting to look at like who makes up that working class, and like I even think of like, okay, Issa, I saw a thought pop off.
When you mentioned about like the class and then like the struggle like through the economic boom after World War II, it made me think of I don't recall who said it, but like the way we use language and then like talking about like the Great Depression. But someone pointed out that it was a Great Depression for the white working class because it impacted them, but for the already marginalized in the United States, they were already depressed. But the way that we framed history and how we framed the American dream is really within the framework of primarily like white higher working class people that fit like the nuclear family, the hetero cis with their white picket fence and their dogs and whatnot. So that's what I want to add on.
Very nice. I mean, and even like the speech that kind of comes to my mind was Dr. King's speech. The major like I have a dream, for the during the civil rights movement.
And I think too that speech is so, to me, I have a dream is him talking about what the American dream could look like, what the American dream for marginalized, especially Black people, could be, what that future of prosperity could be for everybody. And again, like going back to what's happening, especially with Martin Luther King, we had Malcolm X, we had the SCLC, the SNCC, the Black Panther Party. We had, a lot of things happening in Ohio too, with Miami University, which was like formerly an all-women's college, and now it's there now. But there's a lot of Freedom Summer happened here. There's a lot of activism happening here in that time, and I think it's just really important to highlight again when you're thinking about history to think about the historical context, the cultural context, and from all sides, not just one, because we've really basically established that there's kinds of two different realities that people are living through, and the one that we're all being taught is not the intersectional one. And so I just think that it's really important to think about that. And two, especially following World War II, the impact of McCarthyism on what people thought the American dream could look like, and especially for Black liberation movements. I'm sure people know who McCarthy was or what McCarthyism is, but basically helped pioneer the Red Scare, the big C word, communism, and it's understandable considering, World War II and fighting Nazis and all that. But what I think really happened is it damaged the way people view social services in the United States, because people equated social services and equity for people in the United States with communism overseas. And I think that also kind of plays into a lot of the conceptions about the American dream at that time as well.
I also find it funny how everyone was like so anti like communism, but like the Nazis were fascists, and like the Mussolini, like those were all like fascist governments, not communist governments. Like communism is like great, like I'll like none of those extreme governments are great, but like that was fascism.
Exactly, and that's another again a part of history and the way that it's taught to you, different perspectives. A lot of people don't know the distinction or truly what it means, and also doesn't realize that a lot of those other countries aren't truly, communist societies. They're all kinds of titles and terms for the different types of government. And also, too, what it looks like over there is not what it's going to be or look like here, or, that dream, that is still such an underdeveloped dream that I think a lot of people are polarized on. But again, I think that important distinction was that the damage that that has done to the way that we can organize and equitably distribute resources among people in one of the most prosperous, resourceful countries in the United States. Yet we see so much waste and so much lack of care for like our neighbors and stuff. So that's just something that is always in my brain.
Mm-hmm. Jeremiah, you've been kind of quiet. Anything to add?
No, I think America could do better caring for its neighbors sometimes. We do involve ourselves in a lot of wars, but there's also another side of that.
Yeah, it was interesting. We were kind of talking about this last week on our show. I love doing this, getting to do this every single week, because you can kind of start to see like a running theme. Even though that wasn't like, I mean, it was. I'm gonna say it's intentional. Yeah, that's totally intentional on my part. Because one of the so last week I had a poli sci professor on here, Dr. Liam Anderson, um, and we were talking about 9/11 and kind of in war and conflict and how we help our neighbors, um, and or rather, help in quotations. It might be helpful. It might actually not be helpful. And then before that, we were talking to some folks who another professor who was an immigrant to the U.S. and he's talking about kind of the white knight mentality of the U.S. and how that kind of has impacted the dream and like the neighbors and like how we have treated our neighbors. But it's really interesting to see how we treat our neighbors externally and how we treat our neighbors internally. Um, and do you guys ever see like a difference of like how we treat our neighbors externally? Do you think that's different of how we treat our neighbors like internally? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. So when you say externally, do you mean like institutions, a bigger social organizations, social groups, and then internally like more personal social circles?
Like, no, I meant like how we treat our global neighbors, like how the
Mm.
U.S. treats like other nations, and like other nations' conflicts, other nation when a humanitarian crisis happens, how they treat that versus how we treat social issues and things like that.
Oh,
Here,
okay.
Issa, you're dancing.
Yeah,
Pass the
I'll
mic
let Issa go first on this one.
So I'm trying to think of like specific recent examples. The one that I think in general is that the U.S. cares more for either white or our allies that are closer in their proximity to whiteness to provide aid. Um, because like when it comes to refugees fleeing war that the U.S. is either involved in some way, um, that we are not as accepting and open to those refugees. And I'm saying refugees because they're not migrants. They cannot return back home because of war. A migrant has the choice to leave and to return with no turmoil in their home country. But we see that like in the news, like how the media in the U.S. will say migrants, like they use the term migrants, like migrants, 700 migrants, capsized off, the coast of the Mediterranean. Um, but they're not migrants. But that's the way that we're receiving our news, the language that the media uses. And then, like, when you look, like, reading the news in the U.S. and then reading the news that is made outside the U.S., like, the language that they use, the tone, like the U.S. sounds like it's always someone angry barking at you, like, 900 migrants, blah, 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 blah. And then you, like, read a BBC article that says, like, 793 refugees have crossed the river and are following the U.S. policy of seeking asylum, as Ohio, as the United States policy states that you have to physically be at the border to request. But like that type of information is not included, or it's not as often seen in like the U.S. media.
Thank you for that media criticism.
Yeah, as a journalist yourself, I'm sure you've encountered a lot of studies with that. And I think, Issa, that's such an important distinction to make in the importance of the language that we use. We had a really well-known anthropologist, Dr. Janetta Cole, here the other day, and she really highlighted this like importance of language too. And I think that people really need to think about that because it reframes your perspective. Like that literally reframed my perspective for me. So I will be making sure to be, more poignant with my words. I think what's also important in terms of, thinking about our neighbors globally, when you look at the United States, and as someone who is Haitian, my Caribbean, my father's Caribbean, yeah, sac passe, anybody listening out there. So I've seen firsthand the relationships with the United States and countries of the global south and global majority. And a lot of people, when they think about the United States, they think of imperialism. It's one of the highest polluters in the world. There's usually around military bases, and you can look this up. So you fact check me on this. I would look up into peer-reviewed sociology studies. Check what happens around military bases with human trafficking. A lot of times the rates are increased. A lot of the times the cities around there, if they're predominantly working class, there will be a lot of environmental classism happening. We have it happening right outside of Fairborn. You see it happening with our water and our aquifer too. And so when I think about the way that we treat our neighbors, I think that there's a lot of things happening in the U.S. that the U.S. should deal with because that impacts how we directly deal with each other. And I know that the military is a big topic to talk about, and there's a lot of opinions and views. But you cannot debate people's lived experiences impacted by U.S. imperialism. And at the end of the day, that's what the reality is. So I think that way translates into our social circles, our day-to-day life, because people experience interpersonal racism, people experience sexism, people experience, again, how I said intersectionality, all these things are connected. We brought up World War II and how the patriarchy and the nuclear family model and who was the American dream really for. That has continued and continued and changed and shifted and mutated, and now we're still asking these same questions, but there's different policies now. There's still a lot of the same old people in office that still have this access to this generational wealth. We still can't seem to build it as a working class, as a middle class. I can't even think about retirement or paying off my debts or anything like that. And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people. So there's a lot that needs to happen, not only in our social circles, in communities here, just the cultural barriers, truly getting to know and the experiences of diverse peoples here. And I think if we adopted that attitude on an interpersonal level, that would extend to that external level that you're talking about. But we're simply not there yet, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Well, one, I want to know if you guys want to hear more about the military, that's going to be episode number 7.
Perfect.
So, tune in, come back, But, and it's also interesting you said something there, how this, like, idea, like, American ideals and this American dream, was kind of, like, brought over to other nations and, like, we've kind of seen, like, imperialism. I always think of, like, the concept of, like, how like McDonald's in other countries, like where McDonald's should not be, and like kind of and kind of like you see like Americana and like those Western ideals like implanted in other countries and other nations. And I always thought that was like kind of interesting. And like I said, like not like what I said, but like what we're kind of talking about, a lot of that kind of popped up after, you know, World War II and after like we were, because global forces were kind of spreading across the world too. And that could be, you know, we've seen some positives of that, you know, different ideas, different things, but we've also kind of seen some, you know, negatives of this kind of like transportation of ideas and whatnot. So I don't know. That has also just been such an interesting concept for me of just how, you know, we're just this essentially, you know, like there are countries that are a lot larger than us, and that are a lot more populous than us, but yet we're just we're the big kid on the block, you know, we're the most impactful country, and we're just like over here, and it's, I don't know, it's just it's always been a fascinating concept to me. But yeah.
And I think too, let's highlight some good things
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
our history and our people, because I do believe that the diversity and the determination and the drive, um, and the ambition and the dreams that people have are what make this country
for sure.
amazing. And I'm going
For
to
sure.
quote James Baldwin in saying, you know, James Baldwin's amazing. We're reading If Beale Street Could Talk right now in class. Love that book. But one of his quotes, oh, hold on, I really don't want to butcher it, so let me look it up. And he's basically talking about America and why he criticizes it.
Because I love her, I have the right to criticize
Yeah,
her.
he says, and this is from his notes of A Native Son, published in 1955. I love America more than any other country in this world, and exactly for that reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. So
I love
that's
that.
the angle I'm coming
I
from.
love
Let me
that.
clear that up.
That's literally. I feel like that's entire like that's me as a journalist. Is that like we that's like we love our country. You know, I love my country. I love my people. You know, I love my community. But like, you know, there's you have to question it. You know, like you reserve the right to criticize it and to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, which I believe was
Exactly.
the original title of this episode.
Exactly, and it
So,
was, and that's why I wanted to bring it up because, you know, throughout all of this class struggle, all of these cultural conflicts, people have still found the time to organize their communities, to make impacts, and we've seen liberation movements, we've seen different waves of people fighting for their rights and winning. Like we have made a lot of progress, and I don't want to negate that all with, you know, a lot of the things that we can work on, but that is the key thing. I think that people should think of the American dream as what can we do so that equity can be, you know, the standard for everybody. Accessibility is the standard for everybody, so we can all genuinely get to the point where we can dream to do more and go further because we could have all of our basic needs met. You know what I mean? And so I just think highlighting, you know, the movements, especially of like Black, trans, and queer people in the United States and their impact on social movements like the civil rights movement. We have, you know, things that the riots at Stonewall translating into different legislation, and then now in the early 2000s, finally having, you know, gay marriage legalized and things like that. But now we're seeing attacks on trans rights and LGBTQ plus rights across the nation. So now is, I think, more important to ever for people to think about what really is the American dream, what does that mean to me, and what does that look like, and how can I act on it in ways that support my neighbors. And I think that's like the really good and beautiful thing that comes out of, you know, the people and the community here. It's that wanting to learn more, having, you know, the access to organize, having a lot of privileges to connect with other people, and we have the privilege to even talk on the radio and say these things, you know what I mean? So there are good things that can help us move forward equitably in this country, and I think it's important to take note of that, so, especially among the doom and gloom of our living situations sometimes.
I love that. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
And I would add, like, with the new access, like, to like new resources, services, and with like language, I think we can also recognize and see that as American culture that we now know better. So we're now trying to do better.
Exactly.
So it's not like people are more sensitive or whatnot. It's that we know better. We know that that was like traumatizing to use that language or that behavior, and we don't want to continue that trauma. So it's like, no, I know better now. So I want to do better now as a society because we live in a society and not in an economy.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, I introduced my guest last week to the word trauma bonding. So yeah. I kind of want to close off this show with, is there one, it could be a movement, it could be a person, it could be a story. Is there one thing like in history of someone, pursuing the American dream or doing something really good that you're just like, this is really good, this is really positive, that you're like, this is my favorite, I want to talk about them, I want to talk about this movement, you know, thoughts?
Was it Steve Jobs dropped out of college?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think I mean, like the whole idea of like, that's another, I mean, this show could have so many different angles and we could talk forever, y'all. Be like, give me another hour. But like, that's a whole other thing is like that we didn't even get to touch on is education and like, do you need it or not? And like, also because education is, like, I think Isa, you were talking about it briefly there, is that like, it's a part of the American dream and access to it. But it's like, and that was such a part of the American dream. But now we're seeing with young folks, like, do I really need this? Is it really worth it? And like you were saying, Steve Jobs, he was very successful without education, but he was also a rich white man. So it's like, that is an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, and America is the country of dualities and I think dichotomies, and we see that. And I mean, even that was, he could be an example of the American dream for some people. For me, I'm thinking more along the lines of Huey P. Newton, Angela Davis, Martin Luther King Jr., more so because all these people, especially Angela Davis, who's now a university professor, Santa Cruz, which is cool, teaching humanities, by the way. Points for us, Issa. But was on was on the United States federal most like wanted list for doing the organization work and the protesting work that she was doing during the civil rights movement, and has continually fought against the prison industrial complex, social inequities, the rights of her peers and women, and is willing and what and did go to jail for it and did get harassed for it and does get harassed for it, has had her reputation smeared, has had threats on her life, violence against her, and throughout all that, again, that beautiful determination, that beautiful sense of community, that beautiful sense of wanting better for others, that is to me like a great example of the American dream, because she's still here and she's still teaching all these young people, this new upcoming generation, how to organize and what works, and access to this education that is so important, because again, if you're getting history from one side, you're missing out on a whole lot of truth and a whole lot of experiences and a whole lot of connection to other human beings. But yeah, I would say Angela Davis is probably my example.
I actually got to briefly meet her over a Zoom call.
That's amazing.
So yeah, she's pretty cool.
I love that.
Yeah, I thought.
I can't think of any.
That's all right.
I have another one.
Okay.
Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman.
Yeah.
Could be on a dollar bill.
Could be on the dollar bill.
That's true. I feel like me and money got beef. It's because my bank account, we really do. We really do. I really don't think it kind of sucks that you're kind of born and you don't consent to it, and then you got to pay to live. It's crazy to me, low key. Yeah, and right now the way my bank account looks, but no, yeah, I think Harriet Tubman, another amazing example, like literally being enslaved and still finding the determination and the drive and the love for her community, and just being able to overcome those circumstances, and then again helping others. And that's the important part, that community, that once you are with yourself, you go out and you help others get to the same place. So yeah, Harriet Tubman's, I think, a good example. Ooh, Issa has one now.
So I would say anthropologist. I don't remember if she has a doctorate. She might. Margaret Mead. And the reason why is like brief, like story. So it makes sense. So when she was teaching, a student asked her what is a symbol or a sign of a civilization, and students were expecting her to say like pots, pans, some type of weapon, and she responded with a healed femur bone. And then she goes on to explain, like, back in the rules of the jungle, a healed femur bone is a sign that someone cared for the individual, carried them, because they're most likely nomadic, fed them, cared for them, so washed them, and brought slash carried them with them through that journey. And, takes around, I don't know how to doctor, like, we'll say 2 to 6 months varying on to heal a femur bone. So the fact that it healed, because, in the rules of the jungle, that person would have been left behind. They would have been killed immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So to have a healed femur bone meant that they had community,
Mm-hmm.
and that we knew that as humans back then, and whatnot. So I think that's beautiful, but I also think that's reflective of the American dream. I know the American dream didn't exist back then, but the idea of like the community and caring for each other as a society, hunting for them, providing them food, shelter, so they can also participate in life and in the society that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all give me so much hope. Like, like literally all throughout these shows that I've been doing, like I bring on the young folks, right? No shade to my older guests, but like, and then like y'all are like, we're gonna build our communities back up, and like we're gonna like heal each other as a society, and things will get better, and like all this stuff.
Because
like,
we know better, that's why.
Yeah. We thankfully had the access to diverse histories and learning, and now we can share that with other people and get out there and show up for events and work with our neighbors, get to know your neighbors, like the people that live around you, genuinely get to know them. Go to events that different organizations or different groups you're a part of are having. If you see that someone's struggling and you have the means to help support them, definitely do it, because that's how you make cool, awesome human connections.
Mm-hmm. And like that's why I will always advocate for the access to information.
Mm-hmm.
Always against banning books. Always against banning, teaching things in our classrooms. I'm a free speech scholar for a reason. And just always expose yourself to new ideas, new concepts, new people, new information, new perspectives. Keep that mind open. Keep those thoughts going. But yeah, I love it. I love all of it. Alrighty, any final thoughts for this lovely Monday morning that we have?
I just want to say thank you for your time, and I'm really thankful to be here and with the privilege to talk about this stuff. And I'm thankful for the different perspectives that were offered today. And yeah, just thank you for putting this show together. This is awesome.
Of course. Thank you to all of you for coming in at so early on a Monday morning and talking with me. It was great to hear your guys' thoughts and perspectives. To my listeners, thank you for tuning in again on this early Monday morning. I hope to see you guys here back next week, or if I don't have a show next week, because I'll be out of town for a conference, it will be the week after that. But tune in for the next episode of Deconstructing the American Dream on WWSU. But thank you, everyone, for such a great Monday morning. I hope the rest of your week goes well. The next show up on today, I believe, is a show with Bella Skank, or director of WWSU. Hopefully I got that right. I don't know the name of the show off the top of my head, but stay tuned for that. You're listening to WWSU 106.9 FM, Fairborn, Dayton.